Okay, let's open up a text editor. We can use Notepad's freely accessible text editor. And let's type in some commands that we would like to send directly to the Aspen device. Let's start out with the programmable output number 1. Let's set that equal to 1 as if we wanted to turn on an LED. So we set programmable output number 1 equal to 1. That would turn on the LED for us. Next, let's set the input gain of channel 1 to 50. Okay, and finally let's try setting the crosspoint gain of input 1 to output 1. So now we've turned on the crosspoint from input 1 to output 1. So we have these 3 very simple commands that we now would like to send to the Aspen box. So the way to do that would be to first of all save it. Let's do save as, and we'll call this test macro. Well, it's not really a macro yet, it's just a series of commands. Let's call it test commands. We'll create a macro here in a second. We'll save it to our desktop, click save, and you can see we have the file right here. Okay, what I'd like to do next now is open up the command terminal. Let's go to All Programs, Lectrosonics Aspen, not the control panel, but go into Tools and open up the command terminal. And now within command terminal, I'm going to connect to an SPN 1624. I'll select it. Notice it's available. I'll type in ID question mark. And yes, I'm talking to it. Now what I'd like to do is run these 3 commands from my text file directly into the Aspen device. And to do that, I would go to the File menu, and you have this handy playback feature. And when I click that, it's going to ask me, what do you want to play back? Well, I want to play back my test commands text file. I click open, and it runs all of the commands immediately right into the Aspen device. So there's programmable output 1 equals 1. Notice I get feedback that the command was properly parsed, and now those commands are in the box. So let's test it. Let's type in PRG, and we want PRG question mark. So I want to see what the state of PRG out is, and it's indeed 1. Let's test the input gain. And that is 50. And finally the crosspoint gain of 1 to 1, and that is 0. So all our commands processed immediately. And this is a very quick way to send a group of commands into the box, either locally or remotely. So the next thing we want to do is we can modify our Notepad file. Now, if we wanted to fashion a macro, because a macro is simply one of 256 memory locations that holds 64 commands. So if I wanted to take these 3 commands now and not have them run directly and give me immediate results in the box as we just demonstrated, but I want to put them into a macro so that I can call them later. The way we would do that, and let's try that with programmable output number 2 and input gain number 2. Let's do this. If I want to write to a macro memory location, I have to specify the macro I want to write to. So as an example, let's say I want to write to macro number 25. Well, macro number 25, it may have some other commands in it that I don't know about, so to ensure that it's clear, I can issue a macro clear command. For number 25, and we can always go back in the text file and we can type that in. And if I want to clear it immediately, let's just grab this macro clear command and we can copy and paste and send it, and we get an OK. So macro number 25 is clear. So now that we know that it's clear, let's type the macro. Well, I want to give the macro a title. That macro is going to control input number 2 and the programmable output number 2 and the cross point of number 2. So let's call it input 2 control. So to title a macro, I'm going to use the macro TI command. It's going to be macro number 25. I want a title. And I can put anything I like within the quotes. And I will call it input 2 control. And that could be any name that you like. Now I want to write to the very first line of the macro. And to do that, I would type macro. I want to target macro number 25 and the first line of that macro. And I want to set that equal to programmable output of number 2 equals 1. So now anything in quotes is going to be placed within that particular macro, number 25, line 1. Now what I can do is I can just copy this. And I'll paste it on the very next line. And I'm going to call this line number 2. And here I will type in INGN, input number 2 equals 50. Okay, and then finally, macro number 3. Let's get that down to the next line. Let's correct that. And we have an extra M here. Let's call this number 3. And this particular one, somehow I lost my line here. Just some bad copy-paste techniques. So let's make this here cross-point gain XPGN of input 2 to output 1 equal to 0. Now we have all 3 lines, setting the programmable output of 2 to 1, input gain of 2 to 50, and so on. And I always like to include a very last line, just as an indicator that we're done with this particular macro. And this would be line number 4. And it's simply an exit command. And this would also work if you did, let's say you had not sent the macro clear command and there were more commands left in that macro. As soon as it reached the exit, it would jump out. So that's also a nice, good programmatic hygiene. So I'm going to save this file now. I'll get rid of this text here. And let's save it again. And now I can just immediately go here and I can play back the same text file. And notice all the commands went right in. And if I were to look at this, let's look at what the current input gain or the current programmable output state is. PRGOUT of 2 is 0. And it, as well as it should be, we didn't run the commands, we simply put them into a macro. The in gain of 2 is 0. And finally, the cross point gain of 2 to 1 is equal to negative 70, meaning the cross point isn't enabled. Now, remotely, let's do this. Let's run macro number 25. Okay, that has just run all of this code here that we have in that macro. Now let's test. I'm going to press the up key on my keyboard to get back to the commands here. We'll run that command. Now it's 1. Let's run the second command. And now it's 50. And finally, let's run the third command. And it is now 0. So now we can put all the commands into a macro as a placeholder, and we can execute them whenever we want to. So this is a way now we can write macros remotely. Let's go to the next section and do some even cooler stuff.